You think Canadian housewives in the 1950s just copied American recipes from Betty Crocker? Think again. From the fishing villages of Newfoundland to the Ukrainian-settled prairies of Saskatchewan, Canadian kitchens held culinary secrets that food experts now call pure genius. These women cooked by instinct, blending French, British, Indigenous, and Eastern European traditions into dishes that have largely vanished from modern tables. Their kitchens produced meals that required no cookbooks, just generations of passed-down wisdom. Let's dig into 30 meals that 1950s Canadian housewives made without a recipe, meals that chefs now say were brilliant. Tourtière was the centerpiece of French-Canadian Christmas Eve tables, a double-crusted meat pie that Quebec housewives assembled entirely by memory. Ground pork was the traditional filling, seasoned with cinnamon, cloves, and allspice in proportions that varied by family, but never required measuring spoons. Some households mixed in beef or veal, while families in the Lac-Saint-Jean region added cubed potatoes and wild game. The spices created an aroma that signaled the holiday season had truly arrived. Housewives learned the technique standing beside their mothers and grandmothers, absorbing the feel of proper pastry and the precise moment when the filling was seasoned correctly. The pie baked until the crust turned golden and the kitchen filled with warmth. Tourtière represented centuries of French-Canadian heritage in every slice, connecting families in the 1950s to traditions stretching back to the 17th century. Modern chefs recognize this meat pie as a masterwork of spice balancing. Split pea soup was the definitive Quebec comfort food, made by simmering dried yellow peas with a leftover ham bone until everything melted into thick, satisfying warmth. Housewives added diced carrots, onions, and celery without measuring, knowing exactly how much vegetable sweetness balanced the smoky pork. The soup cooked for hours on the back of the stove, filling the house with an aroma that drew children to the kitchen. Salt pork or bacon ends stretched the protein when ham bones were unavailable. This was practical cooking perfected over generations of brutal Canadian winters. The soup could feed a family for days, improving in flavor each time it was reheated. Dried peas cost almost nothing, making this dish essential when grocery budgets ran thin during the long months between harvest and spring. This hearty soup has become less common in modern kitchens despite its remarkable nutritional value. Fish and brewers fed Newfoundland families for centuries, combining salt cod with hardtack biscuits in a dish that required no refrigeration and sustained fishermen through months at sea. The cod was soaked overnight to remove excess salt, then flaked and mixed with softened hardtack that had been broken into pieces and soaked until tender. Scrunchions, cubes of salt pork fried until crispy and golden, were scattered on top along with the rendered fat. Some families added a drizzle of molasses for sweetness. This was survival cooking that became beloved tradition, the taste of maritime heritage in every bite. Housewives knew by instinct when the hardtack was properly softened and the cod was ready. Fish and brewis appeared on tables every Friday and remained popular throughout the decade. This quintessential Newfoundland dish has faded from most Canadian kitchens. Bannock was the bread that united Canadian cultures, an Indigenous creation adopted by settlers, fur traders, and homesteaders across the country. The dough required only flour, baking powder, salt, and water or lard, mixed by hand until it formed a rough ball. Housewives fried it in skillets, baked it over campfires, or cooked it in ovens depending on circumstance. The bread emerged golden and slightly crispy outside, soft and warm within. Served with butter and Saskatoon berry jam, bannock became breakfast, lunch, and dinner across the prairies. The technique passed from Indigenous communities to Scottish settlers to Ukrainian homesteaders, each adding their own variations. Bannock represented Canadian adaptability, a bread that required no precise measurements and could be made anywhere with minimal ingredients. This versatile bread has become less common in modern homes. Maple-baked beans transformed the British tradition into something distinctly Canadian. Slow cooking, white beans with salt pork, and generous amounts of maple syrup until the kitchen filled with caramelized sweetness. Quebec housewives made this dish in heavy crocks that went into the oven Saturday evening and emerged Sunday morning, perfectly tender and glazed with sticky syrup. The maple provided depth that molasses-based versions from south of the border could never match. Some families added mustard powder or onion for complexity, while others preferred the pure maple flavor to shine. The beans improved when reheated, making them ideal for feeding families throughout the week. This was economical cooking at its finest, stretching inexpensive dried beans into meals that felt almost luxurious despite costing pennies. Salt cod cakes appeared on maritime tables every Friday, formed by hand from a mixture of flaked salt cod, mashed potatoes, and seasonings that varied by household. The fish was soaked overnight to remove brine, then combined with potatoes in proportions housewives knew by feel rather than a written recipe. Each cake was patted into shape and fried in bacon drippings until golden brown on both sides. The exterior turned crispy, while the interior remained soft and flavorful, with the subtle taste of the sea. Children who grew up eating these cakes remembered the taste decades later as pure comfort and connection to maritime heritage. The technique required no written instructions because maritime mothers taught their daughters at the stove through demonstration. Salt cod cakes represented centuries of fishing culture condensed into humble patties that fed families economically. Cretins appeared on Quebec breakfast tables as a spreadable pork mixture that housewives made by slow-cooking ground pork with onions, cloves, and cinnamon until it became paste-like and richly flavored. The mixture was packed into crocks and chilled until firm enough to spread on toast. Every family had their own spice proportions, passed down without written recipes. The dish used inexpensive cuts of steak and stretched protein through the week. Children ate it without knowing they were consuming what modern chefs now call a sophisticated country pâté. Cretins cost pennies to make, but delivered complex, satisfying flavor that store-bought spreads could never match. This traditional Quebec spread has largely disappeared from breakfast routines. Ployé was the Acadian buckwheat pancake that Maritime's housewives made for generations, mixing buckwheat flour with wheat flour and baking powder into a sear-thin batter, cooked on one side only. The pancakes emerged with a holy, spongy texture unlike any other bread, perfect for absorbing butter and maple syrup. Served with croutons, molasses, or fresh preserves, ployé accompanied every meal in New Brunswick households from breakfast through supper. The technique seemed simple, but required knowing exactly when the batter was ready and when the surface bubbles indicated the pancake had cooked through properly. This Acadian specialty connected 50s families to French colonial heritage unique to the maritime provinces. Ployé has become increasingly rare outside its traditional home region, despite its remarkable versatility and satisfying flavor. Pierogies became prairie soul food after Ukrainian and Polish immigrants settled the Canadian West in waves from the 1890s through the 1950s. Housewives made the dough by feel, knowing exactly when it was smooth enough to roll thin without tearing. The filling of mashed potatoes mixed with cheddar cheese required no measuring cups. Each dumpling was pinched closed by hand, a technique mothers taught daughters while standing side by side at kitchen counters. The pierogies were boiled until they floated, then fried in butter until golden. Caramelized onions and sour cream completed the dish. Church basement fundraisers served pierogies by the hundreds, and by the 1960s, they had become frozen grocery staples. This Eastern European import became so Canadian that prairie towns erected giant pierogi statues. Cabbage rolls carried Eastern European heritage into prairie kitchens, with Ukrainian housewives stuffing blanched cabbage leaves with a mixture of ground meat, rice, and seasonings. The rolls were packed tightly into roasting pans, covered with tomato sauce, and baked slowly until the cabbage turned tender and sweet. The technique required no recipe because proportions varied by what was available. Cabbage rolls appeared at every church supper and family gathering across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. This labor-intensive comfort food has become less common as modern kitchens favor faster preparations. Butter tarts were the quintessential Canadian dessert, small pastries filled with a gooey mixture of butter, brown sugar, eggs, and corn syrup that housewives made entirely by instinct. The filling was poured into flaky pastry shells and baked until bubbling. Some families added raisins, sparking a debate that continues to divide Canadians today. The technique originated in Ontario pioneer kitchens and spread across English Canada throughout the 20th century. By the 50s, butter tarts appeared at every church tea and family gathering. Modern chefs recognize butter tarts as a uniquely Canadian creation. Jig's dinner was a Sunday tradition in Newfoundland homes, a boiled meal of salt beef simmered for hours with root vegetables, cabbage, and turnip, peas pudding, split peas tied in a cloth bag and cooked in the same pot, accompanied every plate. Figgy duff, a steamed pudding with raisins, often appeared as dessert. Housewives needed no recipes because every woman knew the timing by heart. The meal connected Newfoundland families to Irish immigrant heritage. Jig's dinner represented community and continuity. This elaborate boiled dinner has become rare outside Newfoundland. Saskatoon berry pie showcased the prairie's unique wild harvest, filled with small purple berries that Indigenous peoples had gathered for centuries. Housewives picked the berries in summer, sweetened them with sugar, thickened them with flour, and enclosed them in double-crust pastry. The flavor was unlike any other berry, sweeter than blueberry, with hints of almond. Saskatchewan and Manitoba families made Saskatoon berry pie a summer tradition. The technique passed through generations because proportions depended on how sweet that year's berries happened to be. Salmon loaf stretched precious Pacific Coast protein for families of 6 or more, combining canned salmon with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings. Housewives mashed the salmon, bones and all, knowing the calcium was valuable for growing children. The mixture was packed into loaf pans and baked until firm. The dish represented practical wisdom, transforming a single can into enough protein for an entire meal. This economical main dish has largely vanished from family cooking. Nanaimo bars emerged from British Columbia Hospital auxiliary cookbooks in the early 1950s, a no-bake layered dessert that required no oven and showcased post-war pantry innovations. The bottom layer combined graham crumbs, coconut, and walnuts with cocoa and butter pressed firm into a pan. The middle layer was custard-flavored butter icing, often made with bird's custard powder that gave it a distinctive yellow color. Chocolate ganache formed the glossy top layer. Housewives assembled these bars by feel, knowing when each layer reached the proper consistency. The dessert needed only refrigeration to set, making it perfect for summer gatherings and church teas. Food historians credit Nanaimo women with creating something genuinely new from available ingredients. The bars became so beloved that the city of Nanaimo now hosts a tasting trail with dozens of variations. Modern chefs acknowledge this humble layered square as a legitimate Canadian culinary invention that deserves international recognition. Pudding chômeur was a Quebec Depression-era genius, a dessert that transformed basic ingredients into something extraordinarily satisfying. Factory workers' wives created this dish when money was scarce, but creativity abundant. A simple cake batter was poured into a baking dish, then doused with hot maple syrup or brown sugar sauce before baking. As it cooked, the batter rose through the syrup, creating cake on top and gooey caramel sauce beneath. The name translates roughly to unemployed person's pudding, marking its humble origins. Housewives made it without recipes because the technique was so simple and forgiving. The dish used pantry staples every kitchen stocked. Pudding chômeur represented the resourcefulness of Quebec women during hard times, proving that limitation could spark culinary creativity. This clever dessert has been rediscovered by modern pastry chefs who recognize its elegant simplicity and remarkable flavor. Sugar pie was the French-Canadian answer to every special occasion, a single-crust tart filled with maple syrup, brown sugar and cream that housewives stirred together by instinct. The filling was poured into pastry and baked until just set, emerging with a surface that cracked slightly and a texture somewhere between custard and fudge. Every Quebec family had their own proportions, some preferring more maple flavor, while others leaned toward brown sugar sweetness. The technique required no measuring because generations of women had absorbed the feel of proper filling consistency. Sugar pie appeared at Christmas, Easter, and every Sunday dinner in between. The dish connected 50s families to French colonial heritage while showcasing Canada's maple abundance. This traditional Quebec dessert has become less common as simpler prepared sweets took over family tables. Matrimonial cake filled every Prairie Church bake sale table, layered bars of oat crumble and date filling that housewives made in quantities sufficient to feed entire congregations. The date filling was cooked until thick and jammy, then spread between layers of buttery oat mixture. The name supposedly referenced the blending of two different textures into a harmonious union. Housewives knew by color when the oats had baked to proper golden crispness, and by consistency when the dates had cooked down enough. These squares were economical, using oats that prairie farms produced abundantly and dates that kept well in pantries. The recipe required no precise measurements because proportions adjusted naturally to family preference. Matrimonial cake became so associated with Canadian baking that many consider it a national treasure alongside butter tarts. This humble layered square has quietly disappeared from modern dessert tables. Rappy pie fed Nova Scotia Acadian families for generations. It is a hearty casserole of grated potatoes with the starch pressed out and replaced with rich chicken or meat broth. The dish emerged from the oven with a golden crust, while the center remained soft and savory. Housewives grated pounds of potatoes by hand, squeezed out the liquid, and replaced it with flavorful stock. Chicken or clams provided protein, layered within the potato mixture. Rappy pie appeared at Acadian gatherings and family celebrations, a symbol of cultural persistence. Blueberry grunt was maritime comfort at its simplest and most satisfying. Wild blueberries simmered until bubbling, then were topped with dumplings that steamed until fluffy and light. The name came from the sound the berries made as they cooked. The dumplings used only basic biscuit dough dropped onto the hot berries. The dish was served warm, with cream poured over. This simple dessert represented maritime cooking at its most practical. Flapper pie was a prairie diner and church supper standard. It was a vanilla custard filling in a flaky graham cracker crust, topped with fluffy meringue. The custard was stirred until thick, poured into the crumb crust, then crowned with sweetened egg whites beaten stiff. The meringue was browned quickly under the broiler. Flapper pie represented prairie ingenuity, an elegant and impressive dessert made from humble pantry ingredients. This regional specialty has become increasingly rare outside its home prairie provinces. Which forgotten Canadian dish would you bring back to your family table? Drop your memories in the comments below and share what your grandmother made in her kitchen. Hit the like button if this took you back to simpler times, and subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane. These dishes deserve to be remembered.